All right, I'll start. Happy
This is for the
birthday.
love of parks. I'm Camilla Rivera Tinsley, and today we are in Westinghouse Park for a birthday party.
Happy birthday to you. Thank you all for
This
coming.
year marks George Westinghouse's 175th birthday, and the neighborhood got together last month to celebrate the inventor who called this 10-acre leafy green space home for more than 40 years.
My name is Susie Barber. I'm with Westinghouse Shore, which is a group of retirees who used to work at Westinghouse. So that's why I'm here today. We're very much invested. We bought the cake to celebrate, and we love all things George Westinghouse.
Why?
Well, he was a benevolent employer. Back in the day when there was a lot of corporate greed going on, he was the guy who invented the weekend. He had shorter work weeks. He offered pensions to employees. So he rolled up his sleeves. He was one of the guys. And so we respect and admire him still on his 175th anniversary of his birth.
I spent my life on both sides of the park.
Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess was there to help celebrate. He grew up in sight of the park and still lives down the street.
When the trains would come, we would stand on top of the bridge, and the trains would pass underneath, and the old bridge would shake and shimmy, and we thought we were living dangerously, right? And so I learned to ride my bike in this park. It's been my place of solitude. I used to write my sermons here in the park when I was a young minister. And so we're just glad to celebrate this milestone. We look forward to perhaps building a new shelter of stone and glass, something that will in more apt way honor the great legacy of this park in any way I can be of help.
Westinghouse is a neighborhood park in the truest sense of the word. On any given day, you can find people walking their dogs, kids playing on the giant tree stumps, pop-up festivals, the Homewood Bulldogs practicing, or people just strolling through admiring the impressive trees.
I love trees. I love seeing them here in the park, coming down and enjoying the shade and just listening to the wind in the leaves.
With over 150 trees from more than 30 species, it's no wonder the park was recently designated an official arboretum, only the second one in the whole city. That was the other thing being celebrated at George Westinghouse's birthday party. And we don't think he would have minded sharing the billing with trees or the mayor.
It's a museum of trees. It's a place where you can come not only to see the beauty, but to learn about it even further. And what better park to choose than Westinghouse Park?
Trees really make a park.
This is Susan Rodemaker. She worked for the Parks Conservancy for 13 years and is now the principal of Foreground Consulting.
These trees are clues to the past of this landscape, when there was a beautiful home here and laboratories and underground passages. The trees outline those spaces and tell us a little bit about how the landscape used to be.
You heard that right. Laboratories and underground passages. When George Westinghouse moved here in 1871 at age 25, he was already a prosperous, self-made man. His wife, Marguerite, named their estate Solitude. A strange choice considering the Pennsylvania Railroad's main line ran right next to the property. And Westinghouse's workshop was also on the property. Few who visit the park today know about the history that lays right under their feet. It was at Solitude that Westinghouse developed and perfected many of his inventions.
I think he may be the most important person to ever call Pittsburgh home. It's where he lived was a constant place of experiment.
This is David Baer. He lives a few doors down from the park, and even though he's been there for 40 years, it wasn't until Bike Pittsburgh planned an open streets event that brought hundreds of people to the park that he learned about its history. Now, he's made it his mission to make sure nobody forgets about the legacy of Pittsburgh's most famous inventor.
Westinghouse, unlike some of the other robber barons around here, he cared not so much about money, but about doing things, and specifically doing them to make people's lives better.
Westinghouse's first major invention was the air brake. He got the idea after witnessing a train wreck where two engineers saw one another but were unable to stop their trains in time. Before the air brake, train crashes were quite common. Railroad engineers would stop trains by cutting power, and then brakemen had to jump from car to car to manually brake each car.
Being a brakeman was one of the highest fatality occupations, in figuring out how to stop trains without doing all of that and to stop them quickly. He revolutionized rail transportation at a time when it was expanding around the world. And so one of the consequences was, instead of trains being 10 cars long, they can now be 100 cars long. And that changed the game dramatically, and it made this less of a place of solitude, certainly.
Westinghouse had already invented the air brake when he moved to Solitude, but he made tweaks and perfected it in his workshop.
All right, this is a picture in the tunnel, and this is at the end here where the stable building was. And this is pretty much where we're sitting right over here right now. Underneath it, he had his private laboratory. So there is, under this building, was where his inner sanctum was. So he could come and go in private.
To get from his house to his inner sanctum, Westinghouse had a 220-foot tunnel dug between the two. The idea was that he could go from his house to his laboratory without having to go into the elements. But he was also likely worried about spies who might steal his ideas. It's 8 feet high from the floor to ceiling and lined with bricks, and it's still completely intact.
And when they tore down the house, all the construction rubble filled the end of the tunnel. Other than that, it's open from end to end. As we get along with actual archaeological research into what's buried there, part of the plan is to find a way to open the tunnel for public access. It's way cool. Literally, it's way cool, but...
Westinghouse would often host other scientists and inventors at Solitude. One was Nikola Tesla, who lived there for 4 months while he and George worked out the principles of the alternating current, which would eventually beat out Thomas Edison's direct current model. But Bear says the most historic thing that happened here at Solitude was the discovery of a large supply of natural gas in 3 wells Westinghouse dug in his backyard.
I imagine neighbors would have been very upset by it. They had a standpipe there that was spewing straight natural gas and all the fluids that are in there straight into the sky, and it was a week before he figured out how to cap that. Then shortly afterwards, after he had it under control, he decided to show the steadiness of natural gas, and so he had it lit.
The flame shot out of the top of the 100-foot pipe. It was said that the flame was so bright you could read your newspaper in downtown East Liberty by it.
Westinghouse had 362 patents in his own life in his own name, but everybody who got a patent while they were a Westinghouse employee got the patent under their own name. He wasn't out to make himself big. That's why he didn't start a foundation. He gave his money to his employees. He made sure that people were happy and had good lives and were well paid, and so much so that 30 years after he died, his employees got together and raised the money to build the Westinghouse Memorial, which by the time they got around to it, instead of building it in Westinghouse Park, they decided it should be built in Schenley Park, which is more central and makes a lot of sense.
After both George and Marguerite died in 1914, Solitude was bequeathed to their only child, George III. He sold the property to the Engineers Society of Western Pennsylvania in 1918, and then the society deeded the estate to the city for $1 to be used as a public park and memorial to Westinghouse. The mansion was raised the next summer, and the park was developed. Since learning about Westinghouse's connection to his neighborhood a few years ago, David Bear helped form the Westinghouse Park Second Century Coalition, one of several groups the Conservancy is working alongside to enhance this well-loved but unpolished gem. Again, Susan Rodemaker.
That's one reason that the Parks Conservancy really turned an eye to Westinghouse Park. It is a community-scale park in the city, and there are really just, I think, 12 or so, maybe 13 community-scale parks, which means that it's a smaller park typically, but it serves multiple neighborhoods. And this park is in direct proximity to Homewood neighborhood and to a lovely park that's undergoing a restoration and renovation in Homewood. And there's a lot of awareness and sensitivity about how Westinghouse Park can serve more communities in a better way coming forward into the future.
The park has broad lawns, mature trees, and hidden historic artifacts. Apart from a well-used play area, its paths, landscape features, and community building are outdated and need to be improved. This requires the development of a master plan, and one is underway.
It's a lovely park the way it is, and we're not looking at making radical changes or trying to change the basic use that it serves.
The master plan is a collaboration between many groups, including the city, the Parks Conservancy, Westinghouse Park Second Century Coalition, and the Point Breeze North Development Corporation.
One other thing that's happening in the master planning process is to weave together 4 important elements that we feel help to define the park.
This is Vivian Schaefer. She lives half a block from the park and has been involved in helping to shape the park's future.
One is the history and cultural significance of this place, and another is environmental stewardship. In addition to the trees, this park sits at one of the headwaters of the Negley Run watershed, which floods significantly. It's the largest watershed in Allegheny County and the largest contributor to the combined sewer overflow problem. So we're hoping that this park can contain some elements that will help to mitigate our stormwater issues. And we're also recognizing its importance as a place for recreation. It's a city park, and we think that we memorialize George Westinghouse in that way as well, because of his sense of the importance of providing recreation for his employees, and then maybe most importantly, a community center for Homewood as well as for North Point Breeze and for Point Breeze, a place where we can all come together and be part of one community.
After this quick break, we head to another Westinghouse landmark in the city, the Westinghouse Memorial in Schenley Park, and learn why his employees loved him so much.
He was the first in many ways that are unsung. I think that's why it's been such an honor to be associated with the memorial and with Westinghouse Park, because here's a man who seems to have been a flawless character and whose memorial deserves to live on and inspire future generations.
Did you know that the City of Pittsburgh is home to 165 parks and recreation sites? Well, they're yours for exploring. Visit pittsburghparks.org and begin planning your park trip today.
We are in front of the Westinghouse Memorial. It's in Schenley Park, right off of Schenley Drive. It's adjacent to the CMU campus.
This is Richard Reed. He, along with Susan Rodemaker, helped lead the effort to restore the Westinghouse Memorial for the Parks Conservancy.
This is one of Pittsburgh's oldest beauty spots.
We met up with them there for a tour.
In the 1890s, there was a stream that flowed through here. There still is. The park superintendent, William Falconer, a landscape architect who went on to lead Allegheny Cemetery, he decided to dam up the stream and create a beautiful lily pond. So there was a lily pond with a romantic little picturesque bridge and a shelter, and it was a loved spot by many. And so in 1919, I believe, I think because he was such a titan of industry and innovation, and the proximity to the university campuses made this an ideal spot in which to place a memorial to a man who was an extraordinary humanist and creative force in our nation's history.
Unlike Andrew Carnegie or Henry Clay Frick, who put their names on buildings, parks, museums, and libraries in Pittsburgh, Westinghouse was interested in a different legacy.
And he was really one of the most enlightened employers. He employed the first woman engineer. He cared a lot about the people that worked for him and their well-being.
The fact that he understood that his workers were human beings who needed a certain quality of life, really in order to be productive members of society and happy and good employees, productive employees, he instituted reforms.
He had much more reasonable working hours for people, benefits. He worked directly with his employees. They often found him working side by side with him. He had a tremendous affection for everyone that worked for him, and his employees shared that affection, and his friends and his employees wanted to do something to commemorate him.
So long before Kickstarter was a thing, 55,000 Westinghouse employees chipped in small amounts of money to erect a monument in the heart of Westinghouse's industrial empire. Can you imagine a CEO from today's time having 55,000 of their employees donate a portion of their check to erect a statue in their honor? In today's dollars, it would cost close to $3 million.
In a way, is a testimonial to the humility and kind of humanity that Westinghouse represented.
The monument itself is a semicircle. The image of him is in three parts. The centerpiece is a profile of him working on drawings, and then on either side are a man who is in business suit attire with a slide rule, and the other is an industrial worker with a hammer and in overalls.
The plaque here on the back of the memorial reads, "The memorial is an enduring testimonial to the esteem, affection, and loyalty of 60,000 employees of the great industrial organizations of which he was the founder. All around the world, employees of the various Westinghouse corporations anteed up out of their own pockets to fund this memorial. And not just to fund any old memorial, but a memorial designed by a great architect and a great artist and two of their fantastic colleagues. So this is really a treasure of art and historic interpretation. And it's a treasure of placemaking, because the design of this memorial is not just about the bronze sculpture. It's about the place in which it sits, the relationship to the reflecting pool, all the life that goes on around the lily pond.
The monument's wings bear wonderful reliefs of 6 of Westinghouse's most notable inventions.
Of course, he had, over 360, maybe 370-something patents to his name. So that would be a huge memorial. But this tells about high voltage electricity for mainline railroad, Niagara Falls, where the energy conversion to electricity created this huge impact on industry. Steam turbines, of course the air brake, which was Westinghouse's first and major invention. On the other side, we also have the Chicago Exposition of 1893, the Columbian Exposition, which demonstrated the alternating current, and signaling systems as well. So there's a lot of depth to this memorial. And then facing the memorial with his back to the pond is a sculpture by Daniel Chester French, who of course is well known for his Lincoln Memorial sculpture.
This sculpture, some people always think it's George Westinghouse as a young man, and it's not. The title of it is Spirit of American Youth, and you can see it's a student, a young man holding books and looking up at the profile of Westinghouse, which is the centerpiece of the monument itself.
It's a very classical figure, and there's some debate over whether French did the portrait of Westinghouse, leaving it to Eric Fjeld to do the rest of the bas-relief sculptures. But it's really a fine piece of work, and it's, as I said, a fine piece of placemaking, because then around the statue of the young boy, the American youth, is a step-down area with a bench that's kind of like the prow of a ship reaching out over the lily pond, and it's just a lovely place to be.
When the memorial was originally dedicated on Westinghouse's birthday in 1930, 15,000 people flocked to this little space to witness it. The crowd stretched far out over the adjoining hillsides. There were brass bands and speeches, but people were really there to see the latest work of several of America's leading artists. Architect Henry Hornbostel had already made his mark in Pittsburgh with Soldiers and Sailors Hall and Rodolphe Shalom, and Daniel Chester French was the most important American sculptor of his day. The two working together created a beautifully unique memorial to America's leading inventor and industrialist. This memorial was a beloved place for picnics and engagements and was well cared for several decades after it was unveiled. But by 1990, if you had walked by this spot, you would have seen a sad pond, empty and silted up, crumbling sidewalks, a monument stripped of its gold leaf by vandals. You would never believe it had been one of the most popular destinations in Schenley Park. Enter the Parks Conservancy and the City of Pittsburgh, once again working together.
The sculpture was dingy and dark. It originally had been covered in gold leaf, the entire sculpture. It wasn't thick enough to really be of much value, but it was vandalized, and so eventually the city just let it go. There was no handicapped accessibility, no accessibility for wheelchairs or strollers or people on bicycles to wheel up into the heart of the memorial space. And so our project design made one side of it into a gently sloping ramp, maintaining the details, but allowing for people to effortlessly get into the heart of the memorial, which is nice to be able to provide that to everyone.
The restoration included adding new lighting so that it is now illuminated at night. It also included aeration in the ponds, so that it would keep it from silting over.
The pond was originally filled by water from Phipps Run. However, frequent flooding caused it to deteriorate, so the stream was diverted into a pipe running beneath the pond in 1941. By the spring of 2009, the pond's infrastructure had collapsed, allowing water to drain away. Left behind were leaves, mud, and a space that appeared neglected and forgotten. Also lost were the weeping willow trees, water lilies, and walking paths that were key parts of the memorial experience.
I don't think that it was really on the Conservancy's horizon as a priority project until the sudden drainage happened to the pond. The Conservancy took a close look at it with conservation consultants and determined that the memorial itself, the sculpture itself, was at risk, and so became partners with the city in restoring this project.
After decades of neglect, it was a $2 million restoration project.
So there was a lot of engineering, a lot of structural work that went in to the restoration beyond just planting and the restoration of the monument and the sculptures and the stone walkway that surrounds it.
One of the major changes that this project made was it restored the pond to its original contours. There used to be a spout of water that aerated the pond, which was not original. This is supposed to be a reflecting pond. So it's kind of the eye of the sky in the park. You can stand here, you can see the light of the sky reflected and all of the trees and colors around it. And the focal point, rightly, should be the memorial.
The plantings around the edge of the pond provide an ideal environment for insects. Native grasses, perennials, and shrubs, which are suitable for wet conditions, can be found throughout the gardens.
This type of lily closes at night and comes out in sunlight. If you ever come and see that, it's wonderful to see. If you come down at the right time, when the sun comes up, they sort of stand up and open up open the blossoms up. You can see they're multicolored too. It's so pretty and peaceful and easy to access too.
It's actually not unusual for a conservancy to be involved with the restoration of a memorial because memorials usually entail a level of artistry and craftsmanship that may be beyond the capacity of a city government to fully address. And so that's where a public-private partnership becomes so valuable.
After years of planning, fundraising, and restoration, the George Westinghouse Memorial in Schenley Park was rededicated on October 6, 2016, at another special birthday party for this genius inventor.
Fascinating. When we did our rededication after several years, and the city was a major contributor, $500,000, but at our rededication, two people were there who were the daughters of men who had worked for Westinghouse. Both of them were in their 90s at the time, but they came because their fathers had both been employees of George Westinghouse and knew George Westinghouse.
This memorial, this little corner of Schenley Park, is so much more than a pleasant park amenity. It's part of our history as Pittsburghers, and it helps us to preserve our civic memory, our collective memory of Pittsburgh's industrial past. And just as important, it inspires us to continue innovating into the future.
It was a lot of work, but it's worth it. And I think that it'll be maintained now.
That's it for this episode of For the Love of Parks. We hope you'll keep listening to these stories about Pittsburgh's parks and learning more about the work the Conservancy's partnership with the city does to keep them thriving. To support our work and learn more about the podcast, please visit our website, pittsburghparks.org/podcast. Next week, we are headed to August Wilson Park in the Hill District. This episode was written and produced by Andy Kubis. I'm Camilla Rivera Tinsley, and I hope to see you in the parks.